afternoon, fellow Toastmasters. Solus was a good man. He lived on a farm in Oklahoma, and the year was 1936. He was the kind of man that you would love to have move into your neighborhood. He always helped people. He always had some good things to say, some good advice. He was a pillar in the community. He was an African American, and his wife, Lorenda, was just as nice of a person as he was. She was a pillar in the community. She always would help people when they needed help. She worked in working in people's homes, but when she did have free time, because her children were a little bit older, she would help people if they had somebody sick in their house. People just loved her. Solus and Lorenda were sharecroppers. They lived on a farm in Oklahoma, and they raised corn and cotton. One day, Solus was looking out the window, and there was this big, black, dark cloud. I mean, there was wind, there was dust, there was topsoil, and it was just going everywhere. This phenomenon in the 30s was called the Dust Bowl in America, and it occurred in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas, and a little bit in New Mexico. It was caused by wind, obvious, and drought. In the 30s, they had a lot of droughts in that area. And the soil just got so dry that it didn't take much for the wind to come and lift it up. The Dust Bowl was also caused by poor farming methods. Well, he went outside and he saw that the soil was everywhere except where it should have been, and his house was half smothered with dust and topsoil. And as he looked at the farm, the land, he knew that it was gone. There was no nutrients left in that soil, or whatever it was. So they decided that there wasn't anything for them here. They were going to move to California. They had a model 1928 Model A Ford. So they put everything into their Model A Ford that they could, and they took off for California. They weren't the only ones. There was all kinds of migrants that were leaving these states and coming to California, and they were out on that highway. At night, they would stop and have dinner and sleep. They never really traveled at night. And there were certain rest stops where everybody would congregate and stop because there was water there. And it was black and white were in these migrant camps. In the morning, they would pack up, and then they would drive off to California. Solus thought that he could get a job in Benicia, California, because he had heard that there were some jobs at the C&H sugar factory in Provo. And Lorenda thought that she could get a job working in people's homes. Well, they got to Benicia, and they met this George Snowden. Now, George was, he was a real estate guy. He had like 10 homes. They weren't real fancy homes. They were kind of small. And he was a good landlord. When people would move out, he'd come in and paint. He did all the work himself. And so Solus asked if he could rent one of his homes. And George said, of course you can. So Solus paid the first month's rent. And Solus said, I have 2 children. I have Joseph, who was 17, and I have Pauline, who was 50. And next week they're going to be registering at Benicia High School. So he said, that's fine. So he left, and then he got to thinking. He said, you know, this is the first African-American family ever in Benicia. And he said, I I think I'm going to go see my friend Bill, the chief of police. So he went to see Bill Gomer, who at that time was the chief of police of Benicia. He had a small, maybe 3 deputies besides himself. At that time, 1936, that Benicia was a pretty small town, and half of it was immigrants from other countries. So he saw Bill and he told him what he had did, and that these 2 children were going to be registering at the high school next week. And so Bill said, "Thank you very much for telling me that. I really appreciate it." So then Bill got to thinking. He was a peaceful man. He was a good police chief. He had been the police chief for about 10 years, and he thought, you know, I don't want any violence in this town. That's not what I stand for. I'm a peaceful man, and I'm going to do my best so that we don't have any violence in this town. Remember, this was the 30s, and there was lynchings going on in the South and in the Midwest, and nothing was happening to these people that were doing it. Absolutely nothing. There was some kind of law that Roosevelt was supposed to sign to ban these things, but Roosevelt backed off and didn't sign it. So, you know, Bill was concerned. So he said, you know, I think I'm going to go see my friend over at Benicia High School. So he went over to Benicia High School and talked with his friend Evan Dayton. Evan was the principal over there. He was a young man. He had been principal for about 5 years, and he had gone to school in San Francisco. He was from San Francisco. And so, you know, segregation and all that stuff, that culture was the furthest thing from his mind. So he was talking with Bill, and he said, you know, we got to do something that, to make sure that nothing is going to happen. So they decided that Evan was going to call a general assembly of the students, and Bill would be there. So a general assembly was called, and all the following week, or maybe that Friday, and all the students came filing in. And Evan introduced Bill Gomer, the police chief. Some of the students knew who Bill was, and some of them didn't. And then when the police chief sat down, Evan addressed the students. My dear students, we have a new family in town. They are going to be registering in our school next week. Joseph is 17 and Pauline is 15. And if anything happens to these 2, the perpetrators are going to be answering personally to you. And then he dismissed the assembly. Well, the next week, Joseph and Pauline registered, and you probably want to know what happened, right? Well, it was a little hard in the beginning. There was a little standoffishness. But sooner or later, Joseph and Pauline made friends, and they were accepted. Solus got a job with C&H Sugar, and Lorinda got a job as a housekeeper. So out of this tragedy, of all this dust and stuff, came a good chapter for them, because they started a new life, a more prosperous life. And Benicia got a new family, a family that they grew to love. Mr. Christmas.